Good evening, everybody. I am going to introduce myself very briefly. I run a design office called Viewsdesign, together with my partner Lutz Gebhard. If you want to look it up, at the bottom is the URL. And we have offices in Paris, in Basel, in Switzerland, and in Corona del Mar. And we work on all kinds of design, product, interface, graphic, brand, or UX, how you say for interface design now. I'm going to talk about iconic design tonight, and the reason is that I've written a book about that, and Wesley suggested it, and I think I can share something with you, and I hope you find it interesting. Before you look into iconic design, you have to, of course, look into design. Now, I'm not going to tell you what design is because you know all that. By the time that you've reached the second or third term, you should have developed some proficiency to explain to the people that pay your studies what the hell you are doing here, why it takes such a long time, and that, yeah, it's an actual profession. And this is just because design is such a relatively young profession. You know, since 5,000 years, people know that you're doing houses, you're designing pyramids on bridges maybe. But design only started with the Industrial Revolution, and therefore still people do not know enough about it out there. Even your clients, you may find, need more information. So I'm going to get a little bit theoretical in the beginning. What is a sign? And a sign is basically a stimulus pattern. You have to think of a Neanderthal person going through the jungle, and if there's a puddle, that's just a puddle. It becomes a sign when it, for instance, has the shape of a dinosaur, which we know is impossible because human beings and dinosaurs didn't populate the Earth at the same time. I'm just mentioning that because I know that not everybody has heard that. So a stimulus pattern is something that has a meaning. And there are different types of signs. There are three different types, actually. And they're differentiated by the way how that meaning is attached or associated with, or in relation with the actual pattern. All that goes back to the theory developed by Charles Peirce, who was, interesting enough, a scientist, who then became a philosopher and is one of the godfathers of semiotics. And he said we can differentiate three kinds of designs. There's the icon, the index, and the symbol. I'm sure you've heard about all that, but we're not always aware what that really means. And I'm going to put that a little bit closer up here. The icon is the simplest. That's just a pattern that physically resembles what it stands for. You know, in the case of your face, it's an icon of you. When I see your face, I know this is you. I can see you. Apple ID works like that. It identifies you by your face. An index is a sensory feature that correlates and implies or points to another object or occurrence. Like, for instance, dark clouds in the west, they are an index of impending rain. And it is something that animals can understand. You can understand it without having to really learn that in the sense of a theoretical learning. And the last is a symbol, and words, for instance, are symbols. There are all kinds of learned representations that are not intuitively understood. If you say, you know, a bear represents Russia, we know that. Why do we know that? Even if we have not been to Russia, we know that because we've learned that in school, we've seen it often enough. So that's called a symbol. And we're invited not to confuse these things. Whenever I look into explaining something to people, then I look up the dictionary and say, what does it actually mean? Because I might have an intuitive comprehension, but that may not be sufficiently profound. So when I look up icon in a dictionary, I find that it has four basic meanings. One is that it's a painting of a holy figure, typically Jesus, used in Eastern churches, Orthodox Russian churches, and it's on wood. Usually looks like this. That doesn't help us any further when we're talking about design icons. But I mention that for completeness. Secondly, it's a person or thing worthy of veneration. That is more interesting for us as designers. And do you know who that is? Anybody an idea? Elvis has left the building, but we still recognize him. Or we do Marilyn Monroe, good. Okay, those are icons, and it's easy to understand. Then computing, of course, icons are symbols for apps, programs, options, windows, something like that. Even blurred, you understand that this is how you communicate with your friends. And then there's just for completeness, a linguistic thing, a sign whose form reflects the thing it signifies. For instance, if I say snarling, I use snarling in a snarling way, and that is also an iconic use of the word. So the third way how to explain to you what is iconic entails telling a little story. When I started to write my book, I met two friends who are both designers in London, and Ian and Tim, and I told them I plan to write this book about iconic designs. I'm going to show a lot of samples, and it was interesting to hear their reaction, because my friend Ian said immediately, Wolfgang, people want to know what you think is iconic. And then Tim came and said, no, Wolfgang, people don't care what you think is iconic. And you can imagine that I didn't find that helpful. So I came home and I thought, geez, what am I doing here? So I'm selecting objects that are iconic or not, and Tim thinks nobody cares, and Ian thinks, yeah, that's what people want to know. And then I realized that that actually is a very good explanation, because it means something is iconic when an individual has a response, in this case me, but that response has to be shared with us. If I'm the only person that believes that something is iconic, then it probably isn't. But if you say, well, yeah, I remember this product very well, or your parents do, or people with another cultural background than you do agree with me, then we are closer to iconicity. And to conclude this first theoretical part, we can say an icon is a pattern that's physically representing what it stands for. In the case of design, if a radio looks like the radio of radios, then that's iconic. Then if it's an object of veneration, if we think that's just so cool, we like it, we love it, we adore it, that is a good chance that this is an icon. And the third is if we have individual responses that many people share. And that's as close as I got to a definition of iconic design. So I've written a book about that. Brought it along. If you want to have a look later on, you can. You can get that on Amazon or Barnes & Nobles or your local bookstore. And it shows 120 examples, and some of them I'm going to share with you now, because there are different categories what makes things iconic. The next thing is I want to help you to design iconic objects. That's, of course, the goal. And that is not easy, which is why I need your undivided attention for that. Time is a factor. And initially when I started to write the book, I thought, okay, yeah, if something is around for a long time, then it's iconic. That does not explain all the products that have been around for a long time and are not iconic. And it also doesn't explain relatively new products that have already achieved an iconic status. So this is one of the oldest products that I could find that you can claim are iconic, and it's from 1600 something. It's called the Brown Betty. There are several iterations, several variations of this product with a higher lid and a flatter lid, but most have this typical silhouette, which you find even when you see the Beauty and the Beast. There's this Mrs. Teapot or whatever her name is, and she looks like that. She just has a crown. It's something that we all know. That means tea. That's a photo just in comparison. So I show you the illustrations that I made for the book or for my blog, and I show you photos that you get a three-dimensional understanding, because of course I simplified it and made it to look very coherent for the book. And here I want you to fully understand the shape and see also in this case, for instance, they have a new version. It has been redesigned recently. And the one thing they have added is to make it stackable. And that may not be so important for the household, but it could matter in production when you stack, or in storage, stocking, it for shop, So that's what they added, and they also modified the spout. It's supposed to be non-rip before. What's interesting is that even at the time when it was created, people thought very functionally about this object. They thought we'd give it a brown glaze so you don't see any tea stains. You know, if it would be white, if you ever try to remove tea stains from white porcelain, it's not so easy, and with the brown you just don't see it. So it's a very functional consideration behind an object that is also made for a ceremony, where not only function but also the ceremonial part plays a role, the emotion. Then the Swiss Army knife. Interesting enough, was developed by a German company because at the time Switzerland did not have sufficient industrial means to produce it. So it was designed by Wester & Co. And the Swiss Army asked for this to be developed, and they wanted a versatile instrument in the soldier's pocket, you know, a pocket knife. And today, of course, we know it, the way it looks here. The original looks slightly different. It did not have the trademark red Swiss color yet, and also no corkscrew, you know, so it does have a can opener for the soldier on the field to open the cans, but wine, I think there must have been some French influence or something. So they made a beautiful revamped version of that. And this is one of the many versions they have today, but this is the one that I think is pretty standard, you know. It incorporates a little saw and lots of other tools, toothpick, pliers, tweezers, whatever. One object that strikes me particularly because I'm interested in working in the kitchen, I like to cook, is this object, mixer from, I'm sorry, totally lost here, KitchenAid, the KitchenAid mixer. That's around for 100 years. And it's the same design today in a shop. You have to imagine, you design something today, will that still be around in the same shape in 100 years? I'd be so proud of you. The situation before was this. There was somebody, an engineer, who worked with a company called Hobart, that later changed its name, and to KitchenAid, and he observed people working, stirring dough and so on. That's pretty hard work, particularly when they do it on a professional level. And then he designed machines that would do that automatically. And you can imagine who wants that in the kitchen? Nobody. And that's why he designed this compact version that's easy to clean, easy to look at. And it was so successful that it's still produced and sold today. Now, popularity could be another criteria to label something iconic. And I've picked this one. You all know the Volkswagen Beetle. The story is actually a little bit blurred in the sense that it was not always clear for what purpose it was. It was developed in the Third Reich, in Nazi Germany. And people were invited to buy coupons that they would put in a little folder. And when they had enough coupon stamps collected, they would be able to purchase this as a very reasonable price. And before that all came to fruition, the war started, and the government had the money and used it to finance the war. So very few people actually got one. That's a sad part. But the moment the war was over, production started. It was designed by Porsche, of the Porsche family fame. And then they sold that, and it became the most sold car ever, and still is today. They've made a more modern version that you've seen on the streets here, I'm sure. And it's not the same concept. You know, the motor used to be in the back, and now it's in the front. The whole minimalism, it's a little bit inflated in comparison to the old one, but they retained this iconic shape. It's a very emotional shape. And the advertising from the 70s shows that, you know, it goes back to the egg. What's more at the roots of our origin than the egg, you know? So they really put a high emphasis on the emotion of that shape. Originality. Originality is important in iconic status. The one who is there first always has the best chances for iconicity. And as an example, I show the SK4. Also labeled Snow White's Coffin. That's a radio, post-war time. To understand how novel it was, I have to talk a little bit about what was there before. and what still retains some of the qualities that the previous products had. So you see there are two wooden sides to it, and you can probably see that better here in the photo. The wooden sides were basically to help people understand that's still a part of your furniture. It's supposed to be in your living room. But they used modern material, they used steel, sheet metal to wrap around with the perforations for the loudspeaker, and they used plexiglass to cover it, hence the Snow White coffin moniker. If you look at the details, you see there are plastic buttons, they are gray, and I'm going to show you in the next photo why this is relevant. At the time, that was the standard. Almost every radio company in Germany had a radio that looked like that. And what you can see is that it had fake gold, brass to show some value. It had this kind of tissue to cover the loudspeaker that looked a little bit like hand-crocheted grandma's tablecloth. And it had these buttons that looked like fake ivory. So it was all pretty much a fake representation of materials, of values. And the Brown radio changed all that and said, no, we are open. This is an industrially produced product out of sheet metal, and we use plastic so you can see that the turntable is turning. You can see your controls, but they're protected against dust. So it was a completely different approach. The company was on a march to revolutionize design. There's a film out about Dieter Rams, one of the main designers, or the main designer in Brown, that I recommend you to download from Vimeo. It's about 15 bucks, I think. It's certainly worth it. I haven't seen it myself, but I heard good things, and I'm like, every day I try to watch it. Find a day soon. So here you see, again, the loudspeaker is a very precise pattern of holes to just get the sound through. And all that minimalism made this radio, a transistor radio, iconic. So iconic that even Jony Ive from Apple was influenced by that, as he said when he designed the iPod. You know, it's a very similar distribution of elements. And personally, I think he must be pretty mad that the distance of the screen to the top and to the sides is not the same. I think some engineer, as we say in Germany, spit into his soup there. There's another example, that is Fiskars. Fiskars is one of the oldest companies in the world. It's a company that sits in Finland, and they have been foundry before they started making all kinds of objects out of steel. And they had a tradition in making scissors particularly for craftsmen, for tailors. And in the plastic era, they decided to move forward and create these scissors with a plastic handle. Because you can imagine one of the most difficult parts of making these scissors in the old style is this complex shape of where the fingers go in to forge that, and then afterwards to polish it so it's really smooth. And in injection molding, you do that work once for the mold, and then every time you inject it, you have that same quality. So these are just some of the prototypes they made. Now there's a little fun story behind. You know, today we talk a lot about branding, and for us it's normal that a company has a brand strategy and does everything that furthers their goal to become a brand known for a specific product. That has not always been the case, and that explains why at the time Fiskars had coffee cups, juice extractors, and scissors in their product range. You know, it does not make a lot of sense, but at the time people were probably trying what can we have most success with, and they were not starting from a brand position. Now that juice extractor was very successful, as was the coffee cup. And when they injection molded the first scissors, they still had some of the orange color in there. That's why the scissors became orange. And today we've forgotten about the juice extractor and the coffee cup, but we know the scissors, when they're orange, they're Fiskars. I think that's interesting. When you talk about originality, this brand of eye shades is relevant. It's Alain Miclis, a French designer who basically revolutionized the whole industry by making an eyewear designer even a job. That was not a profession anybody had, you know. So somebody would always do some drawings, but now you have eyewear designers, and they're doing great jobs. And he had a philosophy behind. He said he didn't want this idea, he didn't want to accept the idea that, oh, we are not perfect when we need glasses, and we are not perfect when our faces are asymmetrical. They are, and he enhanced that asymmetry with this completely crazy asymmetric design. He never wanted to see eye shades as a crutch, but as something that helps you to feel more beautiful. He designed lots of other products, these shutter shades, for example, his idea, and crazy asymmetrical things that I'd like to share with you. And even long before Oakley, which is another cool company, he did this full front head cover, including or with the shades integrated. That's an object I like to mention. That's Juicy Salif from Philippe Starck, which you surely know. There's criticism about that object. One is that it doesn't do its job. You know, design has to be functional. We could agree on that, I think. And somehow that doesn't function properly, some people say. But this is only when you see a part of functionality. No, it doesn't press lemons very well. You know, it's too high, it's not really stable, and it doesn't catch the seed. So. But it made Alessi rich, it made Philippe Starck famous, and when you give this as a gift to somebody, everybody thinks you have culture. So it works on 3 levels, you know, that's not bad. So I think it's almost too much to ask that it also squeezes lemons, which I have never seen anybody do that. A little story behind it, how he got the idea, because the original task that Philippe Starck had from Alessi, the manufacturer, was to design a tray. And I don't recommend it as a general strategy to deal with clients. You know, when a client says, can you design a tray? And you come back from your vacation on the Italian insula of Capraia, and you said, look, I was in this pizzeria and I thought, why does a lemon press not look like an octopus? I cannot really answer that question very well. I know that you see some sketches, and some even have, you can see here, a contraption to catch the seeds. But probably they said, nah, that doesn't look so good. Let's take this away. Let's just show the pure little rocket shape or whatever it is. One important guarantee factor for becoming iconic is innovation. And you know, of course, how important innovation is. You are innovators. You are designers, and you have to be innovators. You can't be a designer without being an innovator. You can be an innovator without being a designer, but not the other way around. It's absolutely vitally important. And it's one of the oldest industrially produced products is the Tonet number 14 chair. It's a chair made of bent wood. So all you do, you have about 2 by 2 inch slats that you lathe first to achieve the difference in thickness that you find all over the product. And then you put it in a steam oven to make it pliable. And then 2 guys wrap it around an cast iron form and clamp it and put it in a drying oven for 24 hours. Still manufactured like this today. Interestingly, sometimes the wood splits on the sides, and there's like a doctor coming and wrapping it up, and all these will be, because of the glues being visible, will be tainted black, and only if they don't split up, they can sell them in the original wood color. I've once visited the factory. It's very interesting. It's in Germany. So this is what the product looked like. And it was like an early IKEA. You have to imagine, until then, if you wanted a chair, more or less you went to the village carpenter and said, I want the same thing that my neighbor has. And if you were lucky and your village carpenter had traveled in his apprenticeship, then he knew some more models than just the local ones. And here there was an industrially produced object that could be disassembled so that 36 of these would fit in 1 cubic meter. And it could be shipped overseas. That's why in South America, you find a lot of these in street cafes, you know. Also in Austria, and that's why it's referred to as the Vienna coffee house chair. The company had lots of different models, and if you wonder why it's called number 14, that was number 1. And if you look at the detail on the top, you can imagine here, this is more difficult to do. You know, you have to glue that together, then you have to polish over it. And also, it doesn't have the simplicity. You find that little lathe element at the front legs, And if you look on the left is the original number 14. That's just a simplicity and a beauty that is just complete, still sells today. Next to it is a collaboration of the company Tonet with Muji, the Japanese department store, to make something that is more simple. I let you judge whether you like it better or less than the original. It also incorporates other materials, like steel tubes, I think. A British car mechanic, George Cowardine, he found that the lamps that used at the table at the time, they were not sufficiently adjustable. And he came up with this concept of having 3 or 4 springs and make this adjustable and stay in the position that you left it in, which was hugely beneficial, not only for people working at a desk, but also for dentists, doctors of all kinds, anybody who works and needs to adjust the lamp to perfectly illuminate the work environment. That's still around too. It has been redesigned in the meantime. One of my former bosses, Kenneth Grange, this is the package that came in. The guy started to sell them out of his own workshop until the demand became so high that he asked the company delivering the springs to start the manufacturing. They had a factory and they produced it since then. I show you this also as an encouragement. You know, you see this lamp, that's pretty perfect, you know, it really works. They're still around. These types from all kinds of manufacturers. You know, spring, you just have it in position. How can you make that better? And maybe you think, that's not really possible, you know. So the question about innovation is always, how do I get to the next innovation? And believe me, as a designer, I know how you can be discouraged sometimes. I don't want you to be discouraged. Think of a writer. A writer has 24 letters of the alphabet. And still, he can write always a new story, just with 24 elements. You have a lot more elements at hand. You have material, texture, color, shape, proportion, all this at your fingertips to create something new and something better. Doesn't make it easier, just as an encouragement is possible. And here's another type of desk lamp that's a complete innovation. Innovation works best when something changes. In this case, it was the light source. After long years of having 220 or 110 volts light bulbs from Edison, very respectable invention, great innovation, we had low voltage halogen bulbs. And those bulbs allowed to not have a cable because you see there are 2 bars and they are isolated with these red little dots here. So the axis connects it mechanically, but electrically those 2 bars are separated. So you have the 2 poles that supply the electric energy for the halogen light bulb in the top. And now the designer, Richard Zappa, he used that freedom to create this beautiful balancing object that would also stay always in place. That's marvelous. So don't think that the spring is the end of it all. And here again, today, there are other innovations possible with new lighting technologies like LEDs or so. And you see some interesting products out there. Another innovation, to do a chair with only 1 leg. You know, there are so-called milking chairs. They're little stools, basically just a disc made of wood with 1 leg in the middle that you put around yourself with a belt, and then you crouch under the cow and you start to milk the cow. That's a 1-leg stool or chair. But this guy, Werner Panton, he wanted one that you could really sit at the table, at a dining table, with, and only have 1 shape. No different legs, just 1 harmonious shape. And he worked a long time with that. Here you see him, he's the second on the right. The guy is a bit worried whether, probably it's Mr. Fehlbaum, the boss of the company Vitra, that he's looking at skeptically. And they're working on one of the, not the first prototype, because that was made in plaster, but one of the later models with glass fiber. And the production was a bit tedious. You had to hand layer the glass fiber and soak it with polyester resin, etc., but you would get a perfect surface. And just to give you an idea how many materials were used during the production cycle, which extends until today. So they had the plastic cast model, the glass fiber, then they used polystyrene, when finally somebody decided, let's invest in a huge, expensive steel mold that costs so much money. You don't do that for a chair where you're not sure whether you're going to sell enough, you know, because you have to amortize the cost of the tool. And then they realized some problems with polystyrene, that it would break. Then they went for high resilience polyurethane foam that started to show wear and tear too well, and then they went to the polyurethane structural foam that they use today. And there are other samples made. So this is the Pantone chair, but now they made one that looks like metal. Of course, that is not made of metal, it is injection molded, and they added metal particles that are so fine that it looks like metal. That was not so easy to achieve. And that, I think, could be polycarbonate, even another material, because I'm not sure. It's certainly not foam. Another thing that you can imagine indicates iconicity is occurrence. If you see an object so often, then you think, wow, it's everywhere, that it becomes iconic by just jumping in your face wherever you go and stand. And that would be the Big Pen. The Big Pen has a long story in front, because before the Big Pen came, there was Laszlo Biro, a Hungarian inventor. And he was frustrated because whenever he used a fountain pen, it would block, you know, it would leave ink spots. And looking at a letterpress, he saw that the ink they used was of a much lower viscosity, so it couldn't drip around. And he thought, how can we use that viscosity in a pen and apply it on paper? So he had the idea of using a little rolling ball in the front that would take the ink and distribute it on the paper. And with the name Biro, by the way, he became famous, and his invention became famous. And in South America, they still call these Biro pens, you know. And then he met Marcel Biche, a French guy, who bought the idea from him and shortened his name from Biche to Bic, B-I-C, and started the company with this pen, and it's the most sold pen in the world. It's called the Crystal Pen. It also came in this clear version, that's why. And then the company went on to do other products where they saw a similar mass market appeal, namely this lighter. But still their most selling product is the Big Pen. Who has never heard of IKEA? I think that's virtually impossible, you know. And interesting to see how Tonet started this idea with disassembling furniture or not assembling furniture to deliver it and assemble it where you need it. The founder, Ingvar Kamprad, together with his manager, they were planning to do these furniture things, and they are trying to, for some furniture show they participated in, to load all that on their car, and they looked at it and realized that it would be a good idea to always deliver it to the people or have them pick it up, which is even cheaper because you're not getting your fingers dirty with trucks and stuff. You pick up this thing and then you assemble it yourself. It's done in a very easy way, so you can't really go wrong, except maybe the first time you ever tried. Anybody ever assembled something wrong from IKEA? Yes? Okay. I think it happened to all of us. It's not your personal fault. They have these wonderful illustrations, and normally all the parts in the package should fit the documentation. So there's the weapon of mass construction, as they call it, tongue-in-cheek. And there are millions of these. I think somewhere I read how many, I think each minute so and so many of these are built. There's iconicity by association. What that is, I'll explain. That's a microphone from Shure. And for Shure, pardon the pun, you've seen that with famous singers or maybe even reporters. The story behind goes back to the 30s when radios were not very prevalent. The company Shure, founded by Mr. Sidney Shure, they produced elements that would allow you to assemble that to a radio. Because there were not even radio stations around, so very few people were listening to radio. Now you'll ask, what did they listen to when there were no radio stations? I mean, big popular radio stations distributing all over the country. And with those two main stations coming up, all of a sudden there was less of a demand for radio parts because mushroom-like companies came up that would sell radios that were already completely assembled, but there was a demand for equipment for all the radio studios, namely microphones. And Sidney Shore and his engineer Bauer, Mr. Bauer, they developed something that was a unidirectional microphone. It existed, but they created one with much fewer parts. And the unidirectionality was important, so it would only pick up the sound from the front. Because if you pick up all the sounds, you have this feedback effect that you've certainly been exposed to once, with this high shrieking whistle when the amplifier amplifies its amplification, and then this again and again and again, that creates that feedback. And with a unidirectional microphone, you do not have that problem. For us designers, it's interesting that they designed it in a way to look like the front grille of a Cadillac. They thought, that's luxury product. We want it to look like that. It's interesting because a car and a microphone have nothing to do with each other. But they wanted some familiarity. They wanted to basically piggyback on the image of a Cadillac, if you ask me. I don't criticize it, I just explain it to you. So that's the Shure microphone. And even the company knows how important it is to be associated with all the people that have used that in the past. So they advertise it. And you know, that's Billie Holiday, that's Elvis again, and Jay Leno, James Brown. You can find lots of people with that microphone when you look for it. So that's iconic by association, you know. Another example is Oakley. Oakley was a manufacturer of not handlebars, the grips for motorcycles and bikes. And the founder was, Jim Janner, was pretty smart. He labeled the material, he had a soft material developed for these grips, he labeled them unobtainium, you know, to give it some mythical effect. And then he realized that you can make more money and more innovation, not only focusing on that, but you know, every biker is confronted with speed and objects flying into his eyes, so he protect them against the sun and the wind and rain and insects with eye shades. And so he created really the first sport eye shades that were made for sports. You know, before that, it didn't really exist. And then there was a funny coincidence, namely Greg LeMond, a young American, bought these to wear them during the Tour de France. He didn't get them, there's no sponsorships. He bought them, and then he was the first guy from America to win the Tour de France. And that put Oakley on the map, because they were distinctive, you know. Another thing, always good if your design looks distinctive, cannot be confused. Many people said, oh, that guy, he won, and these cool glasses, and they were yellow. I only could find the black and white photo of the Tour de France at that time. Later on you see some newer models that he's wearing, but I wanted one from the Tour de France. So Oakley was associated with winning the Tour de France. That's never bad. You know how much money goes into sponsoring of athletes. That's the Pigalle shoe by Louboutin, Christian Louboutin. I literally live down the street from where he has his shop, and I don't get discount. It's not that I would buy them for me. I'm not sure I would buy them for my girlfriend. We have this deal that if she wears high heels, I have to pay the taxi. Now, normally in Paris, you just walk to the restaurant because it's also, but hey, heels, taxi. They're just beautiful objects. And you know how many famous women have worn them, and if you haven't seen Sex and the City, just watch 1 or 2 episodes, they'll be mentioned, I'm sure, because Carrie is wearing them. It's just a beautiful, curvaceous object if you look at it. Then there's brand, the brand that can lead to iconicity. I'll explain it with the example of Apple. Apple, when the Macintosh came out, that was 1984, was already a brand name, was well known. People might have tried to buy that because it was an Apple product. And I'm going a little bit further in their history, you know, the iMac changed completely when Jonathan Ive joined the company as the chief designer. It became something much more friendly. Before it was like a business tool, and now they wanted to say, you know, you don't want that in your office only. You want that at home. And people would say, why do you need a computer at home? I mean, Bill Gates is quote that he cannot imagine that why everybody should have a computer. And today, of course, I'll take your computer away, you're going to be really mad at me, you know? I'm not going to do it. So we understand that this is entertainment, information, music, everything, you know, everything we can get from that machine. It's like you have heating, you have water, you have food, roof over your head, and a computer, and then you are linked to anything you may want to do. You can create, you can communicate, you can consume, you can just have a good time. I don't want to propose that this is the only way to live. I just say we are used to this being a part of our environment now. And it's thanks to companies like Apple that have understood that by giving it a design that allows it to fit into your living environment and not only into your office. So they came out with the iPhone. And the first day that was in the shops, people were queuing up. They hardly knew what it would look like, and it was already iconic. It was basically instant iconic. Because people knew what to expect from Apple. They would say, they bring out a phone, other phones were not bad, but they were not smart, you know? Now, some people say, well, yeah, actually all that was technologically in there existed already. Yes, you had touch screens, though not so much on a phone. Yes, you had this and this and this. It all existed, but what Apple is really good at is not only marketing-wise to communicate the advantages, but also to understand the user that is maybe not interested in the technical details, but what you can do with it. And by linking software and hardware, they were in a much better command to create the quality of that product. They could not only say, okay, you can have this app and that app, but this is how it feels. This is how it fits in your pocket. This is how you use it. They had the hardware and the software on their side. I think that's one of the parts why, one of the reasons why Apple is so successful. And of course, when you are successful and when you are iconic, people try to jump on the bandwagon. And you see, from a design point of view, it's kind of embarrassing. You made the button square and you call it a different product? That's embarrassing. I don't want to even discuss that further. You look at it and your designers, you know what to think of that, you know? If Samsung is your client, you show them better. So we have these categories identified: time, originality, innovation, occurrence, association, and brand that help make something iconic. Only these two things you as a designer have a real influence over. You cannot influence time. You cannot say, oh, I want this to be on the market for 100 years. Well, you can try to tell your client, you get a good laugh because he wants the same thing too, but how do you do that? With originality and innovation, you can deliver things that contribute to iconicity. That is your power. That is your opportunity. And I want to add something to that. Because in addition to that, there is emotion. And though I have deliberately not mentioned that before, because not every iconic product has the same emotional level, but emotion always plays a role. For instance, your mother made that cake using that kitchen mixer, that KitchenAid mixer, or say you ran your first marathon, you did not, with the Sony Walkman, you probably used your iPhone for that if you did, then that product becomes something very emotionally important for you. Or you saw that great lady with the Louboutin shoes, or your mother worked something on the Apple Macintosh, it was a part of your household, then it gets emotional. It receives an emotional value in addition to its functional value. And that you can not always create easily, but you should attempt it. Why can you not create that easily? Let me explain. Whenever you talk about emotions, products have two things to fulfill. You want to address familiarity. You want people to feel comfortable. And sorry to say, it's not that everybody's conservative, but we like familiar things. We like familiar faces. At the same time, particularly as designers, we are curious. We want something new. So we want the old and the new. How do you combine that? That is a challenge. So you want recognition, you know? If you design a toaster that looks like a washing machine, people will try to stuff their underwear in there because they don't understand that it's for bread to toast. So you cannot just ignore what is in our visual memory. You cannot just forego that and say, well, I'm going to do something radical new. Good luck with that. It's not so easy. You want an element of surprise, but you perhaps know when you talk to your friends, when you try to surprise your friends, how that sometimes can go wrong. And the same is the case with design. You know, you can surprise people with a completely different design and they say, what the heck? You know, they just don't understand it. They don't get it. There's this element missing, and there's also not the recognition that is necessary to make a product easily accepted. So you have nostalgia. If you look at the Mini car or the new Beetle, those companies just say, we've been very successful with the old Beetle or with the Mini Cooper. Crappy car always fell apart, but people loved it because it's so cute. It looks like you can take it home to bed with you and cuddle, you know. And so they say, let's do again what we've become so successful with. And they riff off the nostalgic component. But it is a little bit in contradiction to the demand for innovation. And when I demand innovation of a designer, it's not only in a technical field that we want you to improve the product, we also want that this improvement is reflected in an innovative look. If you think of the Braun SK4 Snow White coffin radio, that looked completely different, you know? And I want you to do something like that. But even Braun had the wooden sides to resemble a little bit the furniture like the previous radios did. You know, make it a part of the environment. So the most successful new designs, in my understanding, are the ones that respect that we have a visual memory, that we have a framework, framework of experiences that we cannot ignore or shed like that. We want something new, but if we find something that reminds us of something existing before, then we are just more enthusiastic about that. Okay, I brought my book along. As I said, I also have this website, www.iconics.design, where I post twice a week about other things that didn't make it into the book. If you want to sign up, you can get automatic email twice a week, and you may be interested in that. Okay, that concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, please feel free. Yes, please.
You mentioned the CSULB by Wolfgang Joensson. Do you think there is a distinction between iconic and notorious, perhaps?
A distinction between iconic and notorious. That's your question? Notorious as opposed to famous, right? Notorious in a negative sense. Well, first of all, I respect Philip Stark very much for his design. He is a fantastic designer. He's not only very prolific, but he has done not only beautiful, but very comfortable chairs. I sit at home in Paris, I sit on a Philip Stark chair for dinner, because I like to sit for dinner like the French people do for 3 hours, you know. Yeah, not every night, not formal dinners with good friends, informal, whatever. So I didn't want to badmouth Philip Stark for the lemon press, one of his most famous designs. But I think it may also be famous, yeah, because he was tongue-in-cheek rebellious about it. And Alessi also was rebellious. They were looking for a showcase piece that was provocative. Let's say provocative and not that's not so negative, okay? So if you have a client that asks you to design something provocative, by all means do. Or introduce me to him, because I like to work for clients like that. But you're not asked that often, honestly. You're not asked that often to do something that is really provocative. Provocative in the sense that some people may be alienated. If you look in general how a client will ask you to design, you can never please everybody with your design. You will not be able to design something that everybody likes. The Volkswagen Beetle attempted and succeeded to be successful with young people and old people. It had to do with the price point. But often today I'm asked to design something that polarizes, and that is interesting. Polarize as opposed to trying to please everybody. The risk when you're trying to please everybody is that everybody looks at the new product and says, yeah. When you polarize, it means that you have some people that say, oh, no, what is that? And the others, they'll go wild and they say, okay, how much is it? I buy it now. And I don't care so much how much it costs. That's polarization. So it may not reach so many people, but the ones it reaches, it entices much more to purchase and use and live with the object. So yeah, I'd recommend that. Is that an answer? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yes, please?
Pace-wise, what would you say is the biggest difference for designing in France versus in the United States?
Excellent question. I don't design anything for France. Why? The market is too small. I'm European. I'm not French. I'm German by passport. I was born in South Africa. I'm a quarter Swedish. But to wrap it up, I'm European. There you have 350 million customers. That's worth designing for. I lived many years in Switzerland, and I met some companies that said, well, the Swiss market, that's where you can switch off and take and go home. There is no Swiss market. Switzerland is a population is a third of Los Angeles or what? There is no market, you know? Nobody wants to design for 3 million people. Nobody. Of course you want to design for 3 million people if all those 3 million people buy it. But you have to address 350 million to do that. An example is that. That was not written for design students. It was written for the target group was 3 million people visit the MoMA in New York every year. And my secret wish is, of course, that 1% buy my book. I'm so far away from that. But just to give you an example of the proportion. So the French market, 60 million people, not very interested in buying quality. They spend more money on food, on clothes. Going to the movies is much cheaper. You can get a flat fee movie ticket for $20 a month. You can go 5 times a day. That's not possible here. You have these super comfortable seats and you pay $25 for that almost. If you get popcorn in addition on one of these giant 5-gallon Coke things, you're out. Your allowance is gone for the month, you know. So French taste in household appliances, where I'm very familiar, is to not go for quality, not spend so much. And America is very varied. You find a lot of people that shop at Walmart, they go for cheaper stuff. You find people going to Sur la Table, Williams-Sonoma, they buy those Swiss coffee machines that I designed that start at $1,299 and go to $5,000. In Switzerland, there's a good market for that, by the way, but also not big enough. The German market for the Swiss coffee machines is much bigger. So, cultural, there are, of course, a lot of differences, and I know that Wesley and Dave Teubner always want me to talk about the cultural differences. That's a whole presentation on its own. I like both, but I live half in Couronne del Mar and half in Paris, and it's very different. One is a city, and one is not a countryside, you know. It's something in between, one of these Californian conglomerates. You're part of Newport Beach, which is, you know, growing steadily. A lot of people move to Couronne del Mar because it's so cute, you know, and then they tear down the cute house and put a 3-story house on top, and all of a sudden Couronne del Mar is not that cute as it was 1930, where it was a surface town. So the value that tradition and history has here is much smaller than in France. 70% of the building in Paris are buildings like the one I live in, so-called Haussmannian building after General Haussmann. They have moldings, they have parquet floors, they have a fireplace in every room, which used to be there to heat the apartment. Of course, I have central heating now, but I can still light the fireplace if I want. So there's a lot of history feel. My apartment there is modern inside, but with all these accoutrements that came with the apartment. The kitchen and the bathroom is super modern, much more modern than here, where people always, I mean, this is not a good example, but when you go to restoration hardware, that's considered modern. To me, it always looks old. They have these trimmings and these moldings, and if I would build a house new or put that in a house that was built after 1950, I would want it to look like this. There's a ceiling, there's a wall, it's all like mid-century modern, strict and straight. But that's my point of view as a designer, as a German, as somebody who likes something else than the French thing. Where I live here, that's a fairly modern building. It's from the 60s and it looks like that. It has this floor-to-ceiling windows and stuff. But in Corona del Mar, they're still built in different styles. One of them I label the fake drug lord style, you know, this kind of Mexi Italian, you know, red tiles and stucco, and arches. It's like, we are 2019, don't give me those fucking arches, you know, it's long gone. Do something new. No, the taste here seems to be conservative in that regard. Maybe because there's not so much authenticity around, and that's not a criticism, it's just a statement, you know, because, yeah, people see a beautiful bungalow from 1930 and they tear it down. And in Switzerland or in France, they would say, oh, let's renovate that. Let's put in triple glass windows, floor heating, all the most modern technology, but it looks exactly, everything that is nice old is retained. So that's my observation. No more question? Yes, thank you.
Previously, you explained the other.
I'm sorry.
Previously, you talked about how you enjoy making like counterculture design. How do you not scare a client from designing?
Did I use the word counterculture?
No, but I think I read it that way. You kind of push people to see that object and value its difference, and value its uniqueness. And if other people feel that by saying, well, I don't know, I don't understand it.
Okay, I understand it better. I would not call it counterculture. I definitely recommend to do things different, you know? I had a discussion with my daughter and said, you have to do things differently. If you do things the way I do it, the wheel would not have been invented. As a consequence, it's very simple, as a consequence. If we all do things like our ancestors, there is no progress. And of course, I want you to progress and do things better than I do, and better than our forebears have done, and therefore you have to make them different. The trick is to make them different and better. Nobody has told you that design is easy, right? Wesley, did you? No, of course not. No, it's not easy. But it's more exciting to do things different. That's why you're studying design. That's why you want to change the world, right? That's why you become a designer. And it doesn't mean that you're going out on the street with pitchforks. It means to give a constructive contribution to the society, to improve, to step forward. And for that, regrettably, you have to be different. Braun, 1950-something, had to be different than the other radios before. They decided to be different. Now, to convince your client, that's a completely different story. Why is it different? Clients want to succeed. They hire you primarily to make more money with your help. And that's okay, because they work in industry, and industry is not there to be nice to people or pretty, but to make profit. The best thing is you understand and accept that. If you want the society to be a good one, go and ask that from the politicians. Don't ask it from a system that's there to make profit. Don't be disappointed. They are not inhuman. There are lots of nice people working in industry, and they want to do nice things and want to make the profit with good products. But it's not their primary goal. It shouldn't be, you know? They shouldn't hire you because, oh, they want to help you to buy the new motorbike or go on vacation to Hawaii. That's not why they hire you. They hire you to make more profit. So you understand that. And the other reason why they hire is because they know they have to do something, but they have no clue what, which is why you will never get a really good briefing. A briefing is a description of the direction in which you should go. Now, they can't imagine. That's why they hire you. I'm not mean to my clients. I have high respect and admiration for my clients, but I have rarely received even like a okay briefing, and never a really very good briefing. They say, well, you know, we want you to do this and this and this, and you have to learn how to read that briefing. You have to understand what it says. And behind every briefing is the will to make more profit and to make it with a product that is better than what they have now and different from the competition. Otherwise, it's not worth starting. And you have to turn around, and when you present something, you have to say, well, we agree that you want to be different than the competition, you know? There has to be an agreement about that. And they may not start and say, do something different. They may, on the contrary, say, you know, our competitor, he's so successful with this model. I had this company doing vacuum cleaners, and they said, okay, we have 3 categories. One is 59, one 119, and one is $79, you know? And we want you to design a vacuum cleaner for all these 3 categories. That's not a category, that's just a price. So I showed them lots of things, but also something more revolutionary. It looked like a broomstick. You know, believe me, it was newer than what was around there at the time, which you could fold in. And they said, absolutely impossible. And 5 years later, Panasonic came out with something like that, and they had a price tag of $179. It was much more expensive. But they just dared to be different. And I'm sure they had more success than that client that I had. So you have to help your client by showing an understanding for his issues and for helping him to find a way to the future. So they say, oh, our competitor is successful with that. Can you do something like that? You say, well, if you do that, you're just the same. So you can just fight over the price. No manufacturer wants to do that because there's always somebody in China or in the Philippines that does it cheaper, you know, with doubtful, dubious working conditions. And no client that I know really wants to openly admit that he's interested in that. Well, okay, if it makes a lot of money, perhaps. But they don't want to even say that because they know how tacky it sounds. You want to convince them that you have something better and you can create something better. So you always have to really make sure that what you show is actually better. And if it then looks a little bit different, it may take some work, some conviction, and you have to compromise. You have to compromise in life. When you have a partner, you need to compromise. You know what I'm talking about? And I'm not complaining. I have the perfect girlfriend. But, you know, you have to compromise. And when you have a client, it's like a partner in life. It's your business partner. It becomes your business partner. You have to compromise with them. You have to understand. They say, well, this is nice, this is new, but we are afraid we're going to alienate our clientele. The way of the brand thing. So your brand is into leaving things as they are, or do you want to have a more progressive brand? You have to learn how to argue and speak with them. That's not learned overnight. It took me many years to get there. I don't want to scare you. You're smarter than I am, by definition, because you're already younger. You learn things faster, and you know how to work with Instagram with much more finesse than I do. So you'll master that faster, but you have to set your mind to it. You have to know this is something you have to learn. Then you can learn it, because you're smart. That's why you're here. That's the word of encouragement for you. I'm convinced. I just heard there were 60-some applicants for the new term, and the school can only take half. That means from the many people that exist, there's only very few who think they are able to become designers. And from these few, this school can only take half. You are those chosen few. Never forget that. You're getting lost in it. You admit the first term, great, fantastic. I'm lucky, I thought I didn't make it, you know? And then you think you are the lucky one. The school is lucky to have you. The society is lucky to have you devoting your lives to this profession that helps progress. That's an obligation, but it's also something that should make you feel proud. I want you to be proud of that. Okay? Any more questions?
Since you're here, we have many of these students will be graduating in 1 year or in 1 semester or less than a semester. And so I'd like to ask your advice, maybe if there's 1 or 2 pieces of advice that you have for these students who are about to venture into the industry, the creative industry, and about to encounter many new experiences in this design, industry. So I'd like to ask you what maybe 1 or 2 pieces of advice for these students as they approach graduation.
For their life after graduation, because allegedly there is such a thing. First, you should party because you've been studying how many years. You have to let some steam off. You have to relax. And then you look for a job and be ambitious, try to find something good. And when you start that job, don't be too modest, particularly about salary. Don't graduate and then do an internship. That's just silly. I hear that sometimes. It's just silly. Of course you are not an accomplished designer. You are a young designer, which is why you don't get $10,000 a month, but a little bit less, you know? But don't work as an intern, because you have graduated by then, which entitles you and enables you to work as a professional. So you should have a professional salary. You know, if they pay you an internship salary, they are going to ask you to get the beard. I'm very serious about that. Be prepared that a lot of learning is ahead of you. I'm learning every day, and sometimes it boggles my mind. Yesterday I was at the MDM convention in Anaheim, and I learned about a fantastic molding technology that renders a surface antibacterial by making it like a shark's skin. It's a bit complicated. You have to Google it. It's probably taking me, the guy had a super elevator pitch. He was very good. He had a microscope there and a large model and so on. But it was fascinating. It's in the mold. It's in the mold. So it's not a coat also, it's in the mold. And water would run off more easily, and bacteria would have a hard time holding on to that. It's just fascinating. So I go to that show not to meet clients. I met two guys that I hope get me in contact with some people, but mainly to learn. So I'm more than twice as old as you are, so I'm still learning, and this is fascinating. The other thing is be open and alert to make contacts. Where you go, you might meet that person again. So always be cautious, always be polite, always be nice. I got an email from a person that had studied here, but she's French. She studied in France and here, and perhaps she was sitting in my lecture, but I'm sorry, I don't remember all your names. And she said, I'm looking for a job. And I first said, you know, Viewsdesign, we're not hiring right now, but 3 days before, I was on LinkedIn, and one of my former students, who's a brilliant guy and has his own team of people now in Switzerland, is looking for a designer, and she's French, and she obviously was mobile enough to come to California. She can go to Switzerland. And then she wrote immediately back, very nice and politely. I thought, oh, how pleasant, you know. Don't write me off that I know something. It was just happenstance. But you can if you want to. If you come to Paris, you want advice, you can always ask me things. You can ask a lot of people a lot of things. Depends on how you approach them. You know, people will help you. I once thought, you know, in my life I've come across people that for no reason were just mean to me, you know. They try to take something away from me. And that was really frustrating. And I'm a bit naive. I think, why would they do that? That's not conducive to a nice society, you know. And then I thought, how in my life people, without ever being able to hope to get anything back from me, have helped me. You know, not starting with my parents, of course, they had a kind of family obligations, but people, when I worked as a young intern, there was a guy who was really nice and helpful. And I mean, I couldn't pay him or give him anything, and he's probably dead by now. I could never repay, but he was just nice. And there were many more people that have helped me. And I thought, that's actually great. And you know what it is for me? It's for me as an obligation to help people like you. You know, people that are younger, that I can share something with, that I can, you know, give a little bit of a leg up, you know, to help you succeed. Okay? Thank you so much for your kindness and your attention. Have a nice evening.